Hello, everyone. Welcome to a discussion of the novel This Life by Quntos Kunquest. Mr. Kunquest could not be here today. Unfortunately, he has since 1996 been incarcerated at Angola Penitentiary. And unfortunately, the Louisiana Department of Corrections did reject our request that he be here. So I'm a little bummed out about that personally, not only for words and music, but because I've been looking forward to meeting him for some time now. So while This Life was just published in 2021, I've actually known of Mr. Kunquest since 2019, when local author Zachary Lazar's book Vengeance was the focus of One Book, One New Orleans community literacy outreach and free public programming. Throughout 2019, whenever he was at one of the public events, Zach would talk about Mr. Kunquest. And he would say, I met him by chance when I was working on the novel. We've become such good friends. He's a master of words. Wait till his book is published. It's going to take the world by storm. And, you take it with a grain of salt, because whenever someone says their friend's book is the best, they kind of have to say that, right? But in this case, he was right. The book was published and it did take the world by storm. So many incredible reviews. I'm just going to read one excerpt from one of the many raves. This one's written by Amy R. Martin, and it's from the Southern Review of Books. She writes, "What struck me upon reading Quntos Kunquest's debut novel, This Life, set in Angola, the Louisiana State Penitentiary, is the language. Admitting unit, or AU, a new inmate. Wild and out. Vict, or old convict. Population, cats, fat ass, fresh fish, soldier. It isn't just the diction, however, it's the rhythm. Fragmented, staccato. It has a beat. I didn't so much read this book as listen to it. This life is oral. And what better than an oral book at a festival called Words and Music? So thank you so much, Zach, for 2 years ago laying the foundation for this panel today. We have Zachary Lazar here to talk about his friend's book. And joining Zach is A.E. Rooks. Rooks is, among other things, a legal scholar and a historian. And her work at its core emphasizes seeing the humanity in its fullness in every single person. So Zach and Rooks, welcome to Words and Music 2021.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks very much. Thanks, Rooks, for joining me on this. I just want to give a little more background about the book and how it came about. It started, I guess, in 2013 when I first met Quntos, which is a long time ago now. I was there as a journalist, actually, and I was interviewing a lot of people at the prison, many people, more than 40 probably. And I wasn't supposed to be in touch with anybody afterwards, but I waited for about a year, and there was a couple of people I wanted to reach out to, and he was one of them. And he had this novel that he had written. I told him that I was trying to write a novel about Angola, set at Angola. And he said, well, I've already written such a novel, and I'll send it to you, and you can steal from it anything you want to. I said, well, I'm not going to steal from you, but I would like to read the novel. And I really didn't know quite what to expect. I mean, I knew Quntos pretty well by then, so that I knew he was a very smart person. He had a very kind of unique take on the world and a unique way of expressing that. Just to talk with Quntos is kind of an amazing experience because he's got such an original sensibility. Anyway, a lot of people who try to write novels have some of those things, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can write a good novel because there's so many other things that go into it. So he sent me this novel. He made me a copy of it in ballpoint pen by hand. I have a copy of the copy right here. It looked like this when it first came to me. And I don't know if you can see on the screen, but it's really beautifully written, actually, physically. So it's the first thing I noticed. But then I started to read the book, and I was immediately, kind of astonished by how good the book was in a novelistic way. He had learned to do things that many people who go to graduate school for creative writing never learn to do. And he did it all in this. There was a lot of formal artfulness to the book, and there was a great voice to the book, a really very distinctive voice. And so that was 2015, and the book finally got published after many years of trying to get it published. Last June it came out, and it looks like this, just kind of a different look from where it started. And it's been really gratifying to see the world connect with the book, take it as seriously as it's been taken, and given it as much props as it deserves. I've just gone out. There we go. He was interviewed at the New Yorker, for example, which is like a kind of an amazing thing. And so this is the second time I've done an event to try to spread the word about Quntos' book. And it's a difficult thing to do for many reasons, but the most obvious reason is that he's not here. And I told him before the first time we did this, that this is kind of like a mission impossible, because it's, there's two contradictory things one would want to do, which is, one is to obviously to celebrate the book, to celebrate the release of the book. The other thing is to, not ignore the fact that Quntos isn't here to present his own book, that he's in prison. Those are two very contradictory emotional spaces, I suppose. I can say that one thing about him, and I think it's very present in his book, is an incredible sense of humor and a sense of joie de vivre that whenever I express misgivings about these kinds of things, he tends to kind of roll his eyes almost. He knows how smart he is. He knows how brilliant he is, and he's kind of like, oh, the world is starting to kind of catch up. And that's been really pretty gratifying to see too. I just saw him. I was able to visit him on Saturday, and that was really, really nice. And I told him about this event, and he didn't really have anything specifically to say that he wanted to get across. He really thinks of himself mostly as a musician, though, and so I know the one thing that he wants to try to spotlight today is some of his music. So we're going to try to do that later on in the program. But anyway, Rooks is here to give me a hand, and I think, Rooks, you're going to read a little bit of the book, right? So we can get a sense of what it is.
I picked a little slice from the beginning to whet folks' appetite. So nice. Hopefully people like it as much as I do. I just really like this passage. So having waited at the gate for security clearance, Rise has finally made it inside the education building, up the stairs, and into the classic adult basic education classroom, he's been assigned to teach in. After writing the lesson plan on the blackboard and laying out the worksheets, he's awarded a moment of contemplation before the day starts. As he often does in these instances, he turns off the lights and grabs the earth globe. Pulling up a seat behind his desk, he sets the model before him. He studies the land masses and oceans. One of his childhood friends, Marlon, contacted him out of the blue a while back. He had to appreciate the thought. It meant more than he can express. Rise places his finger on the globe, on top of the place where the two of them grew up, Shreveport, Louisiana. He traces a line down to Baton Rouge, where Marlon went to school at Southern University, imagines a few short miles to the northwest, where he's been held since Marlon's school days, Angola. This is where his travels have stopped. Now he slowly traces his finger from Baton Rouge to Philadelphia, to London, to Amsterdam, and finally to Accra, Ghana, where Marlon said he was in his letter, serving in the Peace Corps. Rise pulls a drawer open under the desktop and takes out a pen and pad. His hand remains poised over the paper for a timeless moment. But then he places the pen down and closes his eyes. He lays his head back onto the headrest. After he clears the roster at the work gate, gets counted, and marched out double file into the tool room, Lil Chris waits in line to receive his long-handled ditch blade. He lays it over his shoulder like so many others before him. He returns to the line and waits to begin the long march to the day's work site. The line pusher rides up on his horse and hands his work roster in a leather satchel to the prisoner headline. The headline takes his place at the front of the field line. One of his assignments is to set the pace for the nearly 200 inmates in line behind him. The line pusher kicks his horse off, and the headline begins to walk. A water cooler or two's gonna be picked up somewhere on the way. The convicts on trash detail bring up the end of the line. They gonna be running here and there to pick up litter. On two horses, a little ways behind the field line, are the gun guards, armed to the teeth with handguns and fully automatic assault rifles. Yet, even in the presence of all this firepower, a bunch of strangers, hardened criminals with sharp tools and shit, the scene ain't even tense. It's just another day in prison, much like the ones before it, much like the ones to come.
What a great choice, Rooks. I mean, that, so much of that book comes across in that. I mean, the language and the range of the language, and also the character looking at the globe like that, and giving a really concrete visualization for us about what it means to be in prison, not to be able to go any of those places where his friend is gone. And I think, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I really think that, like you said, it helps sort of give us a roadmap, right, of kind of the journey that we're going to take throughout the book.
Yeah, and I one of the things I like about the book also is that it's not like there's no violence in the book. It's not like it's trying to soft pedal what it's like to be in prison, but it doesn't really focus very much on violence, which is what we're used to with depictions of prison. And what it does that you don't see enough of is show us this other kind of trauma that is comes with incarceration, which is literally just losing your freedom. And being, in this case, a curious, intelligent human being who knows what it would be like to travel to some of those places around the world, who has a friend who has been able to do that, and feels the loss of that, and we feel it too.
Yeah, I think it's like this sort of the realization that there's a way that the outer world just cannot be explored, but also is setting us up for this sort of incredibly rich and detailed inner world of like this particular prison in this particular place at this particular time that's about to get like sort of explored so fully.
Yeah, and the way it sort of morphs from talking about friend Marlon and his travels around the globe to this super, cinematographical. As soon as I start trying to talk about images, my screen goes out.
The irony.
This super vivid, concrete description of going out on work detail to prison, and the voice changes there in a way that's interesting too, because you start to get a little more colloquial, and you also start to get more of a sense of humor that you might not expect, I guess, because there's not a real sense of humor about when he's talking about the traveling the globe sort of stuff. The humor comes in when we get to in a sense, what objectively would be the worst experience, I suppose, which would be going out into the fields like that yet again. These guys on horses with guns, overseeing you. And that's the kind of humor that I think is so potent in this book. It's a form of resistance, that humor, I think, like the hip hop that goes on in here too.
Absolutely agree. It comes up in sort of really unexpected places, which one imagines would also be the experience of humor sort of in that milieu. And it gets to catch you off guard, right? As a reader in the same way, and you sort of find yourself laughing when maybe, oh wait, should I be? But it's funny, right? And it was sort of written that way. And obviously, I have a different experience than you, right? I inhaled this book over the course of the past weekend, and it was just such a ride in that way. And when you talk about the hip hop aspect, right, the lyricism of the book, I think that was such a crucial part of that journey, and how much joy there was in reading about such a difficult situation.
Yeah, yeah. That to me seems like one of its main achievements. And it's a hard thing to talk about, I think, because I don't know, when you talk about characters in a prison novel being resilient, it can sound like you're minimizing what prison is like. You're minimizing the dark side of that kind of life. But it's not what the effect is in the book. I don't think. I think the effect of the book is to just give us a richer portrait of these people, as individuals and also as a community. That's the other thing that really comes across in the book, is the way that, and this is something I saw a lot when I was at the prison myself. I've spent a fair amount of time there. I mean, the way that people become, they go from young people to adults to middle-aged people in space, and as they get older, they become, I think, more and more ordinary,
Mm-hmm.
and more involved in. This doesn't happen for everybody, but a lot of people become involved in community things, like various kinds of religious groups or sport programs and this and that. The drama club, which was Quntos' a big part of his thing. So there's kind of like there's just there's that overlay inside of this place that is a prison.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there are a lot of sort of big conceptual frameworks that get name checked sort of throughout. There's lots of philosophical moments and sociological moments. And it's really interesting to think about the ways that this book is so successful in conveying that there's not just a society here, and there's not just a culture here, right? But there is, and it's individualized, right? Like every prison is not the same, nor could the culture or the community in that prison be the same, because the circumstances are unique. And sort of going back to something that you'd said earlier, that's also really sort of in contravention of a lot of the ways that prison is portrayed, I think, in media.
For sure. I mean, Angola is quite a bit different from most other prisons in the United States, or the world, I suppose. For many different reasons. And it's also such a strange phenomenon in this sort of context of Louisiana. This is a prison that has an annual rodeo every year, where thousands of people go to see that rodeo. And along with the rodeo is this craft fair that is a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. Angola as a site sort of looms large in the imagination of Louisiana in a weird way, in a way that usually diminishes the severity of what it is. But it is a place though where I've never been incarcerated myself, and the only prison I have any real familiarity with is Angola. But I think that how do I put it? Maybe the spectrum of human experience is a little wider in Angola than it might be in other prisons. And I think that's part of what the book depicts. And I think it's important because, I think most people who read this book are going to come into it being, I would imagine people who believe that we need to do something about mass incarceration. I think that's, you're probably not going to pick this book up unless you do think that way. But if we really want to do that, I think it's one of the first important steps is to get beyond preconceived ideas we have about what incarceration actually is. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed, I think we talked about this Rooks before the other day. A lot of times people make this binary switch. They go from thinking that everybody in prison is a monster to thinking that, well, I've seen the light now and I realize that the system's wrong and everybody in prison is an angel. And neither of those views is helpful. I think seeing people as humans is what's helpful. And this book, I think, does an excellent job of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, when we were talking about it the other day, what I believe what I said was there were sort of two sides of the same white saviorism coin, right? And this idea that rather than seeing these as folks who are willingly or not, rightly or not engaged in a system that has to be dealt with, it becomes an all or nothing, kind of affair. And I think one of the interesting places that seems to come through in the book is when one of the themes that gets touched on repeatedly is sort of modern slavery, right? The idea of what is the actual lived reality of incarcerated people and what resemblances does that bear to a certain part, right, of our shared history. And I think a lot of like the imagery that's used and the way that that's sort of contrasted with the rest of the situation that these inmates are in is really, really evocative and really, really interesting and really, really telling.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I mean, one of the original title of the book was actually Power.
I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I don't think it's the best title, but it becomes a better title once you read the book. Yeah. But there was he had a book deal in place years ago now, and it was we were both very excited about it. That was when we did the homework about can he get money for the book? If he does, how does that work?
Right.
Is it legal to publish the book? So the benefit of this deal that fell through, at least, was that we learned all of the answers to those questions. But the publisher that backed out did so for various reasons, but they didn't like the title of the book, Power, and they were really insistent that the book be positioned as directly referencing slavery, modern slavery. And I wasn't, I was in the middle because I was doing the kind of negotiation, and my thought was just that he called this book Power. He didn't call it slavery.
Right.
It was used for that, and I don't think that he would have been happy to have on the cover a picture of guys working in the fields, which is what the publisher wanted to do. And I told all of this to Quntos, and he felt as I expected he would, which is that he didn't want that at all. It was it's I don't know. Marketing a book like this is obviously difficult.
Yeah,
that's where they were.
Yeah, and that's a context, right? Like that's definitely a thematic element throughout the book, but that's not really the story.
Yeah.
And I think that is, that makes a lot of sense to me, having read the book, that is not potentially where he as an author wanted to go. Just out of curiosity, because I think folks might be interested, would you mind talking a little bit more about the process, just a little bit of getting this book in front of folks?
Sure. He sent me the book, and it was a handwritten manuscript, and I read it. I don't know about you, Rooks. You can maybe I'd like to ask you after I answer this one about what your response was when you first read it. My response when I first read it is I sent it to my editor and my agent. I was like, this is an amazing book. It was a different book then, but it was still it was just so extraordinary, I thought. And I didn't think that was just because he was my friend and I knew him. I thought that it was more than that. I kind of expected that they wouldn't necessarily say yes, but I said, let's try it. And what happened is they didn't say yes, but they also didn't say, like, you're crazy to send this to me. They didn't say that at all. They were more interested in it than that, for sure. So I started sending it around more widely. And it started to become clear to me that there probably would be a home for this book. And then I found these folks. It was a rapper's book press, famous rapper. I won't mention his name, but they made an offer with money, and it was very exciting because Quntos is a rapper himself, and we were, couldn't have been better in a certain way. And they seemed like they were more open-minded than kind of a mainstream literary press would have been, and they were maybe going to be better at getting the book into the hands of people. But then I got cold feet, and then Donald Trump got elected, and then it wasn't a fun time. It wasn't a fun time.
Yes.
And there was one more deal that was sort of kind of almost happened, and then it didn't. And then finally, I should have thought of this press much earlier in the whole process, but they were really serious, and they saw it, and they treated the manuscript and Quntos as a writer with great respect. Mm-hmm. And then he got an advance. That took a while. We had to get his W-9 form, which took like 9 months just to get it to him. So there were a lot of little, I wouldn't even say little, there were a lot of obstacles that we had to overcome that were not the usual obstacles when publishing a book. And it's hard enough to find a publisher for a book anyway.
Exactly.
So then he had to do edits on his book without having access to a computer. And so the edits had to be done in the old-fashioned way, sending paper back and forth through the mail, which is, it's possible. That's the way people used to do it, but it can get confusing and things get lost. Actually, this is kind of a funny story. I can't remember what stage of the editing process it was, but I think it was maybe the copy edits or something like that. And for some reason, I don't think they sent it to me, but anyway, they sent it to Quntos. And when you send paper documents to the prison, they photocopy everything.
Right.
And give them the photocopy so that you don't embed the paper with drugs or something like that. Right. And so so anyway, here's the final copy of the manuscript of his novel, I believe it was, and it was printed on 2 sides. And the copy room managed not to notice that, and so they gave him his copy edits back, it was only half of them because they didn't do the 2-sided copying.
Right.
And miraculously, they didn't throw it away because a week went by before I found out about that. And I got on the phone and managed to get into the mailroom, and they found it, and they were able to finally get him full. But it's amazing that they didn't throw it away.
Yeah, that's a lot of adventure. Like publishing, like you said, it's rough enough of a ride without all those extra special hurdles to sort of have.
So stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you're going through this process, and I know I'm sort of returning back to the hip hop question, right? But it's words and music, so why not? And one of the things that you mentioned is that you felt that initially, at least, that this sort of hip hop based publisher would be able to sort of work with the book and feel the book more. And I think that just talking about sort of the musicality of the book, especially in the context of his own goals, and what Megan said actually in the introduction when she was recounting one of the reviews, is it would be remiss if we did not, because like there's some incredible bars in here as well.
Yeah, it started out as a basically a frame to hang the lyrics on. That was what he had all of these song lyrics. He does make music. It's hard for him to do where he is. But he had all of these song lyrics sitting around. And I think he wrote the novel. I don't think he had any plans to necessarily publish the novel or I think it was vaguer than that. But he wanted to use the song lyrics, get them in there, and also I think use them to drive the story. Sure. And so there are a lot of lyrics in the in the piece, and the sort of hip hop battles that take place are also kind of great, I think, because they're kind of an example of what I was trying to talk about before about the sense of community at the prison, that this is a way to fight, without physically fighting. Those lyrical battles, and they're captured really amazingly well. And one of Quntos' pet peeves is that representations of Angola are always really kind of dated. That they have, they tend to reference Lead Belly, and he always jokes that there's always a harmonica playing, forlornly in the distance.
Twang, twang. Yeah.
And it's not like that. We're in 2021, and this book, I think, gives a vivid picture of what it is like, and we see how hip hop works as a social bond, but also how it works in the work, in the fields, how it works as a distraction, something to make the time to go by a little more easily.
Yeah,
and that's described really, really amazingly.
Agree. And it also seems like it's really quintessential to what's, a project of education, right? That sort of is a thematic moment, but also on, I guess, a meta level, sorry. But also sort of what this book is endeavoring to do in some respects, right? Because it feels like we are being educated as we read a book about others being educated. And so, I don't know if we could call it a coming of age thing per se, right? But it does feel like it has that level of using ways to sneak us information, just like, one of the characters tells another in the novel that people learn better when they don't realize they're learning, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, which is, I think that's something that the best hip hop does too. I mean, it increases your knowledge while I don't know, entertaining the hell out of you.
Right.
And that's something we talked about a lot. Reading is it's effortful. Even if you're excited to read a book, it still can be effortful. And so writing has to be seductive. It has to tell a story, of course, and if it's a novel, paint vivid scenes. But also, if one of your objectives is to impart a message, you got to tread lightly with that, and sort of pick your moments, and not have it be like a public service announcement in the middle of it.
Preach kind of a situation.
Yeah.
Which actually goes to, since I didn't actually answer it earlier, to your sort of return volley to me of how I sort of reacted to this book upon reading it. Obviously, I read the finished product, not the early one, but I totally recognized, one, that there was this sort of center around which a lot of amazing things were holding. And I thought that was conveyed like very immediately and very viscerally. And like I said earlier, I inhaled it. I had not been aware, right, of this book before coming onto this project, just because I've been, doing work and other things and haven't had as much time to read. And it was such a great sort of, I guess, reintroduction, although that seems like a bit much, but maybe like, just this is why you love to read kind of moment, is discovering this story that I totally didn't know, that taught me a lot about an area that I'm even more familiar with than most might be. So I thought it was great, honestly.
Yeah. No, if you read it, if you inhale it like that, that's the best thing.
Exactly. Like when you said it, like reading is effortful. Yeah, but some reading is certainly less effortful than others. And this was definitely that kind of an experience for me. I felt like I was gleaning a lot of stuff. I was thinking about a lot of different things at the same time, which is always a really great experience for me personally. And I was just getting pulled along into this like really interesting and sort of incredibly subtle storyline that's building to this great climax, and it's being set up the entire way, but it's easier to see where you come from when you're looking back.
Yeah. It's I never thought of this book as autobiographical, and it isn't really autobiographical, but it is. It turns out Quntos had a younger brother who passed away, and the characters Rise and Little Chris were the main two characters. Our Quntos is, he told me, his imagined I don't know, conversation, I guess, that he would have liked to have had with his younger brother, because there's a mentorship that goes on between Rise and Little Chris. Rise is an older guy who's been there for a while, and Little Chris is brand new at the beginning of the novel. And the novel handles that relationship really beautifully. I think it's not corny. It could be corny.
The ability, it would be there, yeah, but it's definitely not at all. It's a slow build in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we've been sort of talking about, I guess, in regards to a lot of the things in this book, I think come down to a question that I think is one being asked throughout the book, and one that I wanted to ruminate on as well, which is sort of, what is realness? And there's a lot of sort of competing definitions of what realness is, right, depending on your context. But I think what it meant to be real, what it meant to be down for one's community, I think is one of the questions that this book is really grappling with.
I do too. And what kinds of facets of that did you see?
Well, I mean, so we have like the moment when Rise is sort of talking to Seaboy about like, oh, you are real, and like, well, this is what I see when I hear that phrase. This is what I understand it to be, when they're in the cell block, right? Like, I thought that was a really interesting sort of conversation to flip the idea of being real from something that has been positive to something that maybe has a lot of baggage with it and a lot of weight that isn't necessarily that positive. And again, I'm trying not to spoil anything. So, but then towards the end, when it comes down to sort of this idea of whose side are you on? What do you believe? And what can you teach others? I thought that was another place where realness really came into play.
Yeah. I mean, I think it connects back to what I was saying with just growing up, maturity. I mean, being real, of course, is big factor in how a lot of these guys in the book ended up in prison in the first place. And it's a set of tools that they have, and then we're shown how those tools kind of stop being useful, and you have to kind of pick up other tools. And those tools are more intellectual. Not more intellectual. They're community based in a different way.
Yeah.
The experience of some of my friends who the real life experience is always just really interesting. I mean, so many guys who come to Angola, tragically end up running into a bunch of their old friends, the guys from the neighborhood or whatever. And a lot of my friends, and Quntos is part of this group, who arrived at that prison in, I guess, like the mid '90s or something. There was a sort of a deliberate, from what I hear, a deliberate effort by the guys in prison to change the culture of the prison, to stop the violence in the prison, to stop the culture of rape in the prison. And a lot of this had it coalesced around Black power, and
Mm-hmm.
it was mutual aid, and that's something that I think this book also is very much about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it ties in with learning history and learning not only the history of the United States but the history of the world, and finding yourself, you're finding where you are actually a part of that and how you fit into that.
Yeah, it seems almost like it's answering the question, why am I in prison, right? Or why are we in prison, or why is one in prison? And then going beyond what folks did to get there, um, to or didn't do, but also to what structurally has put them there, what the framework that has created the situation. I think one character, Gary Law, I believe, calls it like the trap, right? That has been created to land them into this moment, and what they can do about a trap from inside of it.
Yes, yes, and I think, and what's interesting about that is that part of what they all decide that they have to do about that is to, while learning the trap exists and the history of the trap, they also have to, they feel they have to accept responsibility for the acts that they brought them there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another really important part of this book, is that it pushes it back against this, I think, this binary that we have in our country's way of thinking about these things. That people in prison are there because they did some atrocious thing and they need to pay for that. That's one side of the binary. And the other side of the binary is society created the conditions that put them in prison, and they had no agency. And I think what this book does that is interesting is it's kind of affirming both, and the characters have to, in order to grow, they kind of, whether it's correct or not, I'm not even saying, I'm just saying, for them to mature and grow in this environment, that seems to be what they have to grapple with, is it's not a binary, it's something else, it's a mix.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I guess my perception there, and maybe this is the lawyer coming on through, is that it seemed to me that it was like, yes, let's recognize the place where we are, and the fact that in many of these cases we did what we are in here for, right? And then by the same token, though, I don't think, I guess it was a question of like absolution, right? But a question of recognition that one's options were prescribed, right, from the very beginning, in ways that one did have no control over.
Yeah, that you're saying it better than I was saying it. It shows the yeah, yeah.
Okay, then I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess one of the other things, I guess, that sort of brings us back to the question of sort of the big thematic moments in here, the sociology, excuse me, and the sort of, I think the question of geography and space is just really interesting, contrasting that sort of rural environment versus like most of them coming from really urban places.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard people describe that in real life about what that feels like, and the closest I can get to it is that it feels like, being beamed back to slavery times. I mean, you're a city person, and suddenly you're in this field, with a hoe in your hand.
With a guy with a gun on a horse, yeah.
A horse, yeah. And it's clear to people from the first minute that the reason they're in the field is the reason they're in the field. It's to psychologically traumatized. I mean, it's
Yeah.
That's the point. I mean, when you tell people sometimes that it's a working farm and they grow food, and people sometimes will say, oh well, I guess that's good. It gives them something to do. It's that's not really what it's doing.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, right? And it goes back to something we sort of keep touching on, which is, the purpose of prison, right? Because if one believes that the purpose of prison is completely retribution, right? The purpose is punishment. That's it. Then suddenly it's like, oh, well, farm life, good for them. That sounds lovely. And that's sort of the end of one's interrogation. But then when the question is, well, what is the purpose of prison though? Like what are we doing here? Is the purpose, just as is repeated often in the book, is the purpose just to keep folks here? Because that's definitely how the laws seem to be written. But as folks who, like you said, are more likely to pick this book up because we care about that kind of issue, what does that mean for us? When it comes to thinking about what prisons are doing and how we deal and cope with that project as an element of our society.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, I'm not sure I know if there's a question. I'm also having, Rooks, I wish I could see your face. This is kind of like, it's not your fault, but I can't see your face. I think, the book is obviously an appeal to change the way we are dealing with incarceration. It's, all we can do is keep pushing on that front, I suppose.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't have any answers. I don't have any answers about how.
I don't think that was, I'm sorry, to be clear, that wasn't do you have the solution to the prison industrial complex for us? Kind of moment.
I'm very close
that way. No, just, I think that, like you said, this book has a message, right? And has, maybe if not an answer, several better questions to ask than maybe what we've been asking.
Yes, I think that's a great way to put it. I think it's a book that honestly could probably change someone's mind who didn't agree with us.
Agree. And it's really powerful in part to not use, like you said, sort of an example of someone being spotless or blameless, even if in some cases we may think that as a reader that their actions were justified, right? But nonetheless, we are following folks who very much did the thing that they are in jail for. But the question still becomes, is that right?
Right.
And that's a really, I think that's a really strong and amazing thing to be able to accomplish in any sort of context, book, novel, poem, whatever. And this is all of those things.
Yeah. We're kind of, I think, is this
so?
3 o'clock? Is that when we're done? Because I want to make sure we see hear the music that Quntos made.
I think we might be. So I think this is a good spot to do it, because even if not, and we can save some time if there are any questions. So I say go for it.
Okay, Candace, are you out there? I think we can't. I can't hear the music. I don't know if it's on mute.
I can't either.
It looks like it's on mute.
Here we go.
I hear the water running. It's running under my feet. If you know like I know, yes, it flows past obstacles. You get it cold, it stays solid. You get it hot, it's up in smoke. protection's violence open, yes. And even brought up, it flows, it flows. Still water runs deep, round and around it goes. I said it flows, it flows. Still water runs deep, round and around it goes. And if I were to be free, I know it'll take more than money. It ain't where you're from or where you've been, it's what you know. But if I were to be free, then they would know, they would know. Still water runs deep. And if God were indeed a man, he would heal me. I feel the fire blazing. Feels like my soul is scorched and scorned. And if you know like I know Jesus, don't nothing burn like a broken heart. Oh no, things will surely happen. That small infections will not sustain. Oh no, but if you try it strong with passion, yes, it'll procreate what's going on, and then it flows, it flows. A love's fire burns sweet, round and around it goes. I said it flows, it knows it flows. A love's fire burns so sweet. And if I were to be free, I know it'll take more than money. It ain't where you're from or where you've been, it's what you know. But if I were to be free, then they would know, they would know. And still water runs deep. And if God were indeed a man, and if I were to be free, I know it'll take more than money. It ain't where you're from or where you've been, it's what you know. But if I were to be free, then they would know, they would know. Still water runs deep. And if God were indeed a man, he would feel me.
I would buy it. Look, I'm telling you right now, it's sold.
It's an incredible song. I have it in my head, running through my mind a lot. and I first heard it years ago. Sometimes it'll just pop into my brain. Anyway, I wonder if we have any questions out there. Yes, they are. I happen to I have a bunch of Quntos art here. One of the portraits today was of him and his brother. One of his self-portrait, and then there's various ones. I'm not a video maker, but I tried my best. And the art is interspersed with those little scenes of water and sun burning in the sky, which are photographs I took in Southampton, where I lived part of the time.
Okay. Has he? I guess it's weird to ask. Has he ever seen the video? But has he ever seen the video? Does he like it?
I can't comment. I don't know.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. I guess it appears that we don't have any other questions, so I would like to leave these last minutes to you and to our delightful book. If there's anything that you want to add.
I just want to thank you, Rooks, and thank Megan and Candace and the festival. And I hope people will go out and buy the book and spread the word about the book. And hopefully you'll hear more about the book in the future.
I fully support all of that, except for the part where you thank me. Thank you. And I super enjoyed it. I'm really, really glad that this book came into my life, and I am definitely now I am among the converted. I will go out and spread the word. It's a really, really great book, and I think that even folks who don't think that they would necessarily be as interested in this topic, it's really beautifully written, and it's just really interesting. And it's worth it, y'all. So definitely go and pick it up.
Yeah, I've given this book as gifts to a lot of people, and some of whom are not the first person you imagine that would be interested in a kind of book like this. But people just devour this book. They read it they inhale it like you did.
Exactly. I think I do not feel like my experience is like an idiosyncratic one. I think it was just like the quality of the writing and the story. It just kind of sucked you in. You're like, I guess this is what I'm doing tonight. And that's about it.
It's the best case scenario. Right there.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for talking with me and telling us all about this great work and working with Mr. Kunquest to bring it to us. And please, I guess, pass on my appreciation of his work, and I'm sure a lot of other people's as well.
I will do that for sure. And so thanks again, everybody. And I think maybe that'll wrap it up. Huh?
Thank you to both of you. That was incredible. It was enlightening. It was beautiful. I got weepy at least 3 times, which is, always the hallmark of a good literary conversation. And the beauty of the virtual festival is that this conversation will live in perpetuity on YouTube. So hopefully one day Mr. Kunquest will get a chance to see it. And I know that you guys have done him proud today. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks a lot, Megan.
Thank you for having me, Megan.
Thank you. And for those of you who are interested in this conversation, mark your calendars for tomorrow, the 19th at 6 p.m., when we will have historians talking about work with incarcerated women to teach them historical methods and research, and then they'll be documenting their own experiences while incarcerated. So this will be the first part of a 2-year presentation. The first part will be historians talking about the methods, and then next year we will have the women themselves here to talk about what they've written. So tune in tomorrow at 6 p.m. for Lessons for Louisiana, Incarceration and Public History. In the meantime, we are going to take a little break. We are going to be back at 3 o'clock. We are going to shift gears, 3:30, I'm sorry, it's 3 o'clock now. 3:30, we're going to shift gears a little bit and head into some music for Words and Music. Thank you all so much for tuning in for This Life by Quntos Kunquest. Thank you again to Zach and Rooks for a great conversation.